Click the bell icon to get latest videos from Ekeeda.
Hello friends, we'll be discussing how to solve a trial balance problem whereby the details about debit and credit are supposed to be mentioned in the format of trial balance. Let's figure out with the illustration mentioned below. So when we speak about trial balance, we basically talk about debit balance and credit balance been mentioning in the format which we have discussed earlier. So what we'll be doing is that the illustration has been mentioned down here. We'll be going through the illustration and then we'll be preparing the format for trial balance and then posting each of this item with either the debit balance or the credit balance that has been mentioned or that we have to assume as per the kind of account that we are dealing with. So let's go ahead with the illustration and figure out what all items have been mentioned. We have bank loan as 14,000. We have security as 6,500. Bills payable has been mentioned for 1,000. Unearned revenue has been mentioned for 3,500. Sundry debtors has been mentioned for 12,000. Outstanding salaries for 2,500. Prepaid rent for 2,000. Insurance expense has been mentioned for 7,300. Owner's investment has been mentioned for 95,000. Rent and rates has been mentioned for 400. Accrued depreciation on equipment has been mentioned for an amount of 14,000. Accrued revenue has been mentioned for 15,000. Machinery has been mentioned for 25,000. Drawing has been mentioned for 3,500. Equipment has been mentioned for 40,000. Maintenance expense has been mentioned for 5,000. Miscellaneous expenses has been mentioned for 4,800 here. Accrued expenses for 1,500. Depreciation expenses on equipments 2,000 has been mentioned. Unexpired expenses or insurance for 8,500. Vendor payable 500. Now that we have all the details here, we'll be going through with the format of trial balance, and each of this item either has a credit balance and debit balance, and each of this item will have a debit balance and credit balance. So we'll first figure out whether they have debit balance and credit balance while preparing the format itself. Let's go ahead and prepare the format first. So we have mentioned all the specimens that are required here. We'll start with the items that were mentioned in the illustration. Let's start with bank loan. As it is a bank loan, it will always have credit balance, hence the amount has been mentioned in the credit side as loan is a liability. Now, marketable security, that means it's an investment for us. Investment will always have a debit balance, hence the amount has been mentioned on the debit side. Bills payable is a liability, hence it will have credit balance. Unearned revenue, that means a contingent income, is still a liability because we never know whether we have or whether we'll receive this amount or whether we can have to or whether we have to give this amount back to the person who is giving us the income. Hence, it is a liability, will always have credit balance. Sundry debtors being assets will always have debit balance, hence mentioned on the debit side. Outstanding salary, that means salary that is supposed to be paid, it's a liability, hence it will have credit balance here. Prepaid rent, that means rent paid in advance. Anything that is paid in advance is an asset for us because we have already paid it for the next year, hence it won't be considered as liability, it is considered as asset. Asset always has debit balance, hence the amount has been mentioned on the debit side. Insurance expense. Now, as you know, debit all expense and losses. Hence, insurance expense has been mentioned on the debit side here. Owner's investment is a kind of credit balance because it is shown on the capital side, capital which comes under liability, hence it will have a credit balance here. That means business has to give this person, that means the owner, his amount back that he has invested. Hence 95,000 will be mentioned on the credit side. Again, rent and rates expense, it's an expense, hence a part of debit balance. Accumulated depreciation, that means it's a provision for depreciation. Provision for depreciation is always has a credit balance, hence it is shown on the liability side in balance sheet. That's the reason it will show a credit balance here. Accrued revenue refers to the revenue that we have already earned but we haven't withdrawn that amount, hence it is an asset for us, will always have debit balance. Machinery being an asset will have debit balance, hence the amount has been mentioned in the debit side here. As we know that capital has credit balance, drawing is a subtraction from capital. Hence, drawing will have a debit balance. That is, it is an expense for the owner. Hence, expense have been mentioned on the debit side. So, drawings will be mentioned or will have debit side balance here. Now, equipments as in is an asset for us. Asset, as you know, will have debit balance. Hence, the amount has been mentioned on the debit side. Maintenance expense is an expense. That's the reason all expenses have debit balance. The amount has been mentioned on the debit side here. Miscellaneous expense being an expense again will be mentioned on the debit side. Accrued expense is an expense that is already done but we haven't paid for it. That's the reason it is accrued. Something that is yet to be paid or yet to be received if it is an income form. So if it is accrued income, it is an asset. If it is an accrued expense, it is liability, hence mentioned on the credit side here. Depreciation again being an expense will be mentioned on the debit side. Unexpired insurance is again something that we can call as prepaid insurance. Prepaid insurance will always be an expense that has been already paid in advance, hence it will have debit balance here. Vendor payable can also be called as bills payable. That's the reason it has been mentioned on the credit side. So with this, we have closed all the entries that were mentioned in the illustration. We'll go and figure out the total of debit side and credit side as well. In the meantime, you can also total so that you are able to see that the debit side total is equivalent to the credit side total. That will mark the closure of this trial balance prep. So with this, we come to the closure of this specific trial balance. These were all basic items which will have debit balance or credit balance. And accordingly, we have found out that the debit side total is equivalent to the credit side total. So this is how you prepare a basic trial balance with all these items being mentioned. The only thing is that you need to categorize whether it will have debit balance or credit balance according to the kind of expense, income, asset or liability it is. So thank you for watching this video. Stay tuned with Ekeeda and keep subscribing to Ekeeda.